Thank you. Thank you. Industry expert. Wow, I've been promoted. Thank you very much for that introduction. So before we get into the sort of the core dialogue around assessment as it relates to how one might think about digitising that, ensuring the fairness and accuracy of the process and making it a great candidate experience, I thought I might put some broader context on that in relation to not only how we should be assessing talent that we're bringing into our respective businesses, but also who is it that we might be thinking about as the potential talent that you'll need in the future to drive your organisation. So 5 perspectives that I'll share over the course of the next 15 or 20 minutes. As Natasha said, we've got a sort of round table dialogue, so plenty of time for conversation as we go through. But if there are kind of questions, perspectives, or ideas that you want to share as I'm sharing this stuff with you, please feel free to do so. It's always much more fun and interesting if the sessions are interactive. So the first of those drivers that I think most businesses will be starting to consider as it relates to their talent strategy is taking a more holistic view of the workforce. So I think in many businesses that I've come across over the course of the 20-something years doing all of this stuff, there tends to be a situation where organisations often work in silos, where they think about internal mobility, hiring external talent on a permanent basis, contingent workers, contractors, consultants, in a different way, rather than thinking about all of those capabilities and potential skill sets, as I say, more holistically. And I think that's particularly, there's some sort of push and pull factors associated with that. It was interesting that, the overwhelming answer was the sort of scarcity of qualified candidates or talent availability. And there's probably some, as I say, push and pull factors associated with that in the UK. We're at pretty much the highest level of employment that we've ever been at since records began. But I think a really interesting perspective on that is that the vast majority, or a significant proportion, I should say, of new jobs that have been created in the last 3 years have been in actually small businesses or people choosing to make the jump from working in corporate organisations to being self-employed. And I think that is a significant factor in that lack of available talent, because more and more people are making the choice to work independently rather than to work for a single organisation throughout their career. So, a first perspective would be for you as talent professionals to start thinking about ways in which you might be able to look at all of those potential skill sets and resource availability together rather than looking at them independently. So certainly you're still going to be looking to hire people on a permanent basis, but we often hear about, or in my experience, you often hear about organisations who struggle a little bit around internal mobility, and so are there ways in which we can help people that are already in our business to move around the organisation more effectively? It's really weird how often we hear the example of it's actually easier to get a job outside of this organisation than it is to get one in it, and so could we be doing things that allow us to be more proactive in supporting internal mobility? So just as, for example, starting to see a number of businesses come up with the idea of career concierge or the internal headhunter. So rather than it being all on the individual to find their next role in their business, actually providing a support infrastructure that allows us to actively promote opportunities and source talent internally and help them make moves and transition to other career opportunities in the business. The third is this whole concept of borrow. So how can we use that sort of flexible associate workforce in a more impactful and effective way? We'll be hearing from Deloitte a little bit later, and one of the things that I think they've started to do really well is create alumni, where they're interacting with people that have previously worked with Deloitte throughout their career and bringing them back as associates into the consulting business, and perhaps at the end, where they're nearing the end of their career, perhaps don't want to work on a full-time basis anymore, but are really happy to come in and flex. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for businesses to get that alumni program working really well, but thinking more about how we can use people on an interim or contract basis rather than just permanent employees. And so I think that brings into question the role of recruiters to an extent. So, the traditional role of the recruiter has been as the person that finds candidates for the jobs that our hiring managers are looking for us to fill. And I think the better talent acquisition professionals doing that interface with hiring managers are really starting to help the line manager question, what is the best type of resource for them to bring into their team. It doesn't have to be that you replace a permanent member of staff with another permanent member of staff. Can you think about more flexible ways in bringing that team together in an impactful and effective way? Automation, a big factor for many businesses. So the whole concept of automating tasks that have traditionally been done by people, and thinking about automation and technology as a part of your resource pool. So are there things that we could be doing to technology enable our teams that mean that we don't need quite as many people, or we need different skill sets, or that we can use people in a virtual or more flexible way? And then finally, seeing lots of really interesting ways in which organizations are starting to partner with other businesses that might have access and capabilities that they find difficult to attract. So thinking about a sort of, if you like, a people or resource supply chain where you're joining up with other businesses and thinking about those companies as part of the talent pool on which you can draw down upon. So hopefully a sort of simple framework for thinking about that whole marketplace for skills and capabilities in a more holistic way rather than in silos. And I think that whole concept of talent acquisition teams having to be a bit more agile is really important. Sometimes it's the systems that get in the way. So many businesses that we work with kind of operate in this method where HR and the talent acquisition team have accountability for hiring permanent team members, sometimes accountability for mobility as well. Often we find that procurement are the function that leads the acquisition of contingent and contract workers. That seems to me to be a bit curious and maybe something that will change relatively rapidly. And certainly what we're seeing many businesses think about is, rather than having separate talent acquisition and talent development functions, drawing those together. So you're thinking about not only your existing team members, but those that you are looking to hire into the business, as I say, in a more holistic way. And then very often we'll see situations where the business itself, hiring managers, line managers, are bringing in consultancy firms or hiring people on a statement of work, and that doesn't seem to be controlled by anybody. And so you have these kind of silos that often appear in businesses where you're not necessarily looking at those talent flows holistically. And often, there's some systems challenges around that as well. So I'm guessing that many of you will have a applicant tracking system, a workflow tool that allows you to manage that permanent recruitment activity. Then you've got something completely different, a vendor management platform to manage contingent workers. They don't talk to each other. How do you see, all of the talent that's available to you? So I think where the market is going from a technology standpoint is to start to draw all of that stuff together so that you're able to have a more holistic view of the talent that's available to you, either inside or outside the organisation. So think of that as a trend, as something that I foresee more and more businesses starting to think about. One of the questions that was asked is, how do we improve candidate experience? Is that on the agenda of many of you in the room? Yeah. So it tends to be that those sort of old world applicant tracking systems are a bit clunky. Anybody from Oracle in the room? Okay, I'm safe for the moment. And it's a pretty rubbish experience. If one of the things I always say to people when they are thinking about a new career in a new business is, what was the experience about applying for a job? Or if you've been in an organisation for a while, when was the last time you tried applying for a position in your own company? Often it is ridiculously hard and the process is clunky. And in some instances, people are doing a much better job of branding at the front end and getting the kind of careers website looking spangly. But then, you drop off a cliff when you go into the ATS and the experience is pretty horrible. So, I know Alan and Lauren will talk about this in the context of assessment, but certainly there's lots and lots of opportunities to kind of improve that experience through applications that sit over and above the applicant tracking system. So almost think of it in the same way as you might do with your smartphone. So it's great having a phone, but it's actually the applications that make it interesting to use. And I would ask you to sort of think about the technology infrastructure around talent acquisition in a kind of similar way, where the ATS is effectively the smartphone. It's not very interesting, it's the plumbing, but it's actually the applications that you're able to put over and above that make the experience good for the candidate. So think about your sort of technology roadmap and what applications you might choose to put on your phone through that 3Es model. Does it allow us to make the experience more engaging? Can we be more efficient and more effective as a result of applying those technologies? One of the challenges is there's just masses of technology out there, so I wouldn't be surprised if many of you get calls most weeks saying, I've got this brilliant piece of kit that will solve all of your recruitment challenges forever and ever, and actually finding the needles in the haystack is pretty difficult. And so thinking about it through the lens of those 3Es is one way to look at it. The other facet of customer experience that I think is starting to play a significantly greater role in the kind of candidate experience as they go through the sort of process of hiring process, if you like, is this concept of feedback. In my days in the world of recruitment outsourcing, there would always be key performance indicators of cost per hire, time to hire, customer satisfaction really being a sort of questionnaire that might get sent to a candidate once they'd either failed to get the role or had got the job. So they were either super happy or super sad, one or the other, rather than actually getting any feedback along the way. And importantly, giving feedback to the candidate in the process. And so I think another facet of this is thinking about how we will have amazing kind of consumer experiences online when we're on Amazon or Spotify or whatever it happens to be, and how can we apply the same principles to the candidate journey, making sure that we're giving them a great experience but also giving them an opportunity to provide feedback. So one way in which that can be done is around in a similar way that if you sometimes get text messages that say rate your experience of buying something or flying somewhere, being able to do that through the recruiting process as well. So how was your interview today? How was the process of applying? What can we do better? And giving the opportunity to speak to someone if the system is a bit clunky or you're finding it difficult. And Al, again, will be able to share with you a little bit about how we give pretty much instantaneous feedback to candidates in the assessment process that's personalised and tailored to the individual. So even if they don't get the job, there's the opportunity to provide feedback that's helpful in their search for the next role. Third thing is around flexibility. If there's one thing that, as talent acquisition professionals, you have the opportunity to influence in your organisation, it would absolutely be this. So giving both existing employees and potential employees the potential to work flexibly, to have a greater balance between professional and personal interests. I think loads of businesses that are winning in the so-called war for talent are those that are able to provide the degree of flexibility that many of the sort of demographics of our workforce are looking for, be that a generation that's now having more and more caring responsibilities, for millennials and those people coming out of education, not necessarily having a clarity of purpose around their career and therefore wanting to get experiences of other things. So that concept of a side hustle, running your own business alongside, the day job, having the opportunity to take time out in the year, so do 12 months work in 11 and take a year out, take a month out. So all of those things we see as really beneficial in solving some of those talent acquisition challenges, because it's those businesses that are offering that greater degree of flexibility that seem to be winning, because it's so important to many of those people that you're looking to attract. The other thing is around the technology allowing you to work more virtually. So again, some stuff that comes out of the Office of National Statistics when they update on sort of workforce data. Over 5 million of those 32 million people in the workforce today spending at least 2 days a week working from home or the beach or wherever it is that they choose to work. And so that whole concept of being output driven rather than input driven, and sort of a culture of presenteeism, I think is super important in kind of being able to attract, but most importantly retain talent on a flexible basis. And actually it's throwing up new business opportunities as well. So Allen & Overy, a Magic Circle legal firm, were finding it difficult to bring people back into their organisation to work on a permanent basis, so set up Peerpoint. And Peerpoint is a business where people work on an associate basis, again, started by looking at Allen & Overy alumni for people that didn't necessarily want to come back and work on a full-time basis, and effectively giving them the opportunity to work as in-house lawyers for their clients, but on a flexible and contracted basis. So you're starting to see differences in sort of business models as a result of that, push factor around people choosing to work more flexibly. Any perspectives on flexible working in the room? Yeah.
Just a quick question about the side hustle.
Yeah.
How realistically, how accommodating do you think employers currently are to the prospect that maybe working full time for them, but I've actually got another business on the side? Are they genuinely getting their head around that?
Yeah, I think it really varies actually a lot. So, in some situations you have sort of in regulated industries, for sake of example, there's kind of a few hoops that individuals often have to jump through in order to gain those permissions. And I think the most important facet of it is transparency. So, the organisation saying it's okay as long as you share with us, what it is, and that there's no conflict of interest with either from a commitment to you as the business or your customers or whatever. But I think more and more so, it's becoming part and parcel of life, where even if it's something as simple as I can think of someone in my family who sells vintage clothing through their own shop as an activity alongside the career that they're looking to build, and I think that sort of spirit of entrepreneurship is actually really valuable as a kind of asset and competence and capability in the context of their career, but they're having fun doing something outside. I'm sure many of you think about and probably have an active plan around diversity and inclusiveness in your recruiting process and in your organisations at large. I just wanted to pick out one facet of that, which we see as becoming much more prevalent in the thinking of some businesses, and that's around cognitive diversity. And a really good example of that is a company called Auticon, who we work with. They're a social enterprise, and they employ only autistic consultants, many of whom have been long-term unemployed, found it really difficult to find work. So you put someone with some facets of autism into an interview process is probably the worst thing that you could possibly do for them. But you think about some of the capabilities that they have beyond sort of neuronormal, so around pattern recognition, usually an amazing ability with numbers, that gives experiences and capabilities that are extremely valuable, particularly in sort of technology-led organisations or businesses which are having to deal with cybersecurity, risk management, and so on and so forth. And so one facet of diversity and inclusiveness that we see becoming more prevalent, and us having to think about a bit more as we plan and establish our sort of talent acquisition practices, is around cognitive diversity, and how do we embrace that as part of the talent ecosystem more effectively. And then the last thing I just wanted to share with you was around demographics. So, we're in a position, until very recently actually, where life expectancy has increased by pretty much 2 years every decade since the beginning of the last century. And if you happen to be my son's age, my youngest son's age, you've got a 50% chance of living to 103 in the UK. I'm tired already, and I'm only halfway there. So it's just a perspective that I would share, that we're in a situation now where we've got 5 generations of the in the workforce, but you've also got this situation where actually more people are choosing to join the workforce later in life for a whole variety of different reasons. Better health, the fact that they haven't quite paid the mortgage off yet. And so, another piece of interesting data that comes out of the ONS every quarter is it breaks the workforce down by demographic. And so 287,000 people joined the workforce in the last 12 months who are over 50. And my sense is that there's not too many businesses that are focusing specifically on that demographic. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you discriminate by age, but there are things that one might be able to think about in terms of attracting talent of that age group and profile into the organisation. So we're seeing, I love all of the stuff that's happening around the change in this dynamic on apprenticeships, for example, where people being able to retrain in their organisation or come into the workforce and get new skills slightly later in life. And there's some really good business reasons for wanting to think about that workforce. You tend to get greater loyalty, lower workforce attrition in the over 50s, but in some instances also greater productivity. So just a practical example for you that BMW is struggling to find engineers and people to work on their primary build sites in the sort of standard demographic that they've been recruiting into, and so been focusing specifically on the over 55s actually, and just doing things that make the workplace that much more friendly to that workforce has proved to have a significant impact on productivity. Final point is, I think there's been a lot of dialogue around the utilisation of technology in the workplace and the negative impact that might have on either your workforce of today or for opportunities in the future. It's really great that seeing more and more businesses kind of, as I say, owning the debate and really demonstrating that as being a positive opportunity and not just a negative. So in the context of my old employer, Alexander Mann, we used to have 125 people that organised interviews for our customers across the world. It's really dull. And so by creating something called Isaac, our interview scheduling bot, we were able to reduce that 125 down to 25, and those 25 individuals effectively being concierge to the candidates and hiring managers when there were things in the process that needed supporting that couldn't be done via technology. So I think there's a way in which we can communicate about the opportunities that developments in technology bring. And I think more and more businesses are starting to get their heads around that. The other thing that's worthy of note is that it will also create new job opportunities that perhaps didn't exist when I was coming out of uni, for sure. Some of these I find quite scary, but the concept of actually data broking we're starting to see as the technology giants are utilising data in interesting ways. But I'd point you towards that Cognizant Centre for the Future of Work. There's a brilliant sort of 15-minute video that talks to all of the sort of careers that are likely to be created as a result of the greater utilisation of AI and machine learning. It's a really thoughtful, thought-provoking perspective that they share about not only some of the jobs that are less likely to exist, but also some that will do that maybe we hadn't really thought about too much. And then finally, we talked about kind of experience earlier. It's not just about the experience of getting into the business, but then the experience of how you're perceived and what feedback you get during the process. So again, one final perspective for you is particularly for early in careers, so grads, apprentice schemes, and those that are entering the workforce for the first time, one of the primary reasons we hear for people choosing to move on is actually that they don't get the feedback and career pathway that they expected to get. And so a question for you is whether or not the kind of annual performance appraisal process is really fit for purpose anymore. So just as we were talking about kind of customer experiences earlier, in the recruiting process, can we think more about a consumer grade experience for performance management as well? And I think there's an assessment perspective to that as well, providing people feedback and opportunity in the business once they've started, rather than just when they're joining.